Good morning, everyone. This is Jenni Walke from Elephant in the Room Consulting and Kylie Mowbray Allen from Hello Media, and you're tuning in to Bite Size Business, the live podcast show that helps small business owners get clarity and insight into growing their business dream. How are you this morning, Kylie?
I'm great. Great to see you today, Jenni, and I'm super pumped to be talking with you today about this really important topic. So, woohoo! But how are you going, Jenni?
I'm really good. I'm excited. We're 10 days away from our trip to New York and New Orleans. So we're pretty excited about that, getting everything ready for the conference and just kind of making connections so that we can get the most out of those 2 weeks.
Amazing. I'm so happy for you. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about this morning before we get stuck into our topic, which is a bit of a carry on from last week where we were chatting with Brad about privacy audits and all kinds of things. So I did my privacy audit with Brad this week after I had a hack on my Instagram. So what bizarre timing, because that's never happened to me before. And it was not just me, we know a few other people that it happened to the exact same thing. And so anyway, luckily I had my session with Brad that afternoon. Can I just say the best $100 you will spend, even my mum did it with him yesterday.
Amazing.
And she did it on Zoom with him and she said, I couldn't believe it. And now she's got this long list of things she needs to fix up, but super, super awesome. So yeah, highly recommend jumping on that. And then last night, a friend told me that they fell victim to a scam. So I wanted to share what happened with that because they said to me, oh, it's not such a big deal because it was only $1.60 and I've taken everything out of that card so they can't actually use it. And I was like, hang about. So what happened is they were waiting for an Australia Post delivery of a parcel. So when they got the Australia Post text saying, your parcel, we couldn't deliver it, click this link and you need to update your details, whatever. And so they said at the time it was a little odd, but didn't really think much of it because it said it was definitely Australia Post, but it included that you needed to, the amount of the money was including VAT. Well, that's British. And then it asked for this zip code rather than the postcode, which is obviously US. So clearly there should have been some alarm bells there, but whatever, keep going. Then it said needed to pay an extra little bit because that was missing off the postage someone had sent to them. So it was only $1.60. So to enter the credit card details and off you go. So anyway, then pretty quickly they realized, oh, I think I've been scammed. And so anyway, they said to me last night, I don't feel like it's such a big deal. It's only $1.60. And I took the money out of the card, so there's nothing that they can use. And I'm like, hang about though, what are they going to do with all that other information? So I said, just the fact that you've taken that money out doesn't mean that they will try and just do tiny amounts and the bank will let it go over. And so anyway, I just thought it was very interesting after what we were just talking about last week, that we've got to be so, so, so careful. And those little alarm bells, like the VAT bit or the, what was the other thing? The postcodey thing?
Post a zip code, But also, a colleague of mine, I send a lot of stuff to clients and we've had a lot of shipments coming in because we're getting a whole lot of, festoon lights for the house and fun things like that.
Nice.
I was actually expecting, or my colleague was expecting a delivery from us that was delayed. And he got a text saying there's been a delay. Can you click here? And he said, what? And it came up and I said, oh, what I always do is I look at the link. And the trick here is when you actually get those things from Australia Post, if it is from Australia Post, it says ozpost.com/something. If it's a dodgy one, it's generally going to be a bit.ly or some crazy one. And this particular one had no connection, the link to Ozpost, even though the text said it was Ozpost. So the way that I always get around those is if I see something like that, I don't ever click on a link off my phone because what I'll do, I'll go to the source. So if Qantas sends me something that seems a little odd, I'll go and check my Qantas app rather than actually click on the link. If it's a delivery delay, I can actually go into Ozpost and track a delivery through Ozpost. So for those who don't know, you can actually set up your own little account and any Ozpost things coming to you, which is free, you can actually track it without having to click on links. So that's how I've gone around those, is don't ever click on the link unless you're very certain that the URL and everything else that's on there is from that company. But with bit.ly and stuff like that, you never actually know, right?
That is such an important thing that you've just said. And that reminds me that last week I received a text from Linked. So every time I come into Queensland, I've got to pay a gazillion tolls on different roads. And so I've got this Linked thing set up. And they sent me a thing saying, oh, you haven't paid your most recent toll, whatever. And I'm like, oh, I haven't actually been to Queensland for, because when I went up for the Billie Eilish concert, I was in my brother's car. So I was like, that's really curious, but hey, clearly they know better than I do. So I clicked the link, and then it was asking me to log in, which I didn't because I can't remember how to do that. And I thought, I'll just deal with that later. Then I get an email from Link saying, please beware, there's a new scam going on. Always know we will never send your link in a text. So I thought that was really interesting too. Never.
And I got the same link. I probably got the same day as you. I got a linked one as well. So all I did, and I was like, hang on, I've got an automatic direct debit on my account for my linked that goes to my business. So I know that I'm never going to be overdrawn or whatever they call it. So I did the same thing. I went to the source. I didn't click the link in the email. So just, that's the really good tip. If you get a link in a text message and you're not sure, don't click it. You can actually just Google it. Go to your email or go to the source, whether it's your bank, whether it's Qantas, whether it's Virgin, whatever you're flying with, whatever you're doing, you can always go to the source to find whether or not that's true and accurate information.
That's what my friend said last night, is that after it all happened, then they went off and Googled it and went, oh, it's a major scam.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so
a good lesson for all of us. And I think a reminder that right now, actually one more thing is that I watched on YouTube, I can't remember what the channel was, but just do a search on YouTube, all about call center scams. And it was really tragic. It was all about them being set up in India. Part of the people in India being interviewed were saying they're devastated because now that country is becoming known for being scammers. The other people being interviewed actually worked for those scammers. And it was saying that they thought they were getting a legit job in a call center. They were thrilled with that. Second week into the job, they're pulled into the office and told, we're going to give you a bonus if you stay on, but if you don't want to stay on, you can leave. But the truth is, we are a scam center. And then each one of them stayed because they said what they realized is that they weren't really hurting people. So actually it wasn't really a big problem. It was people willingly handing over their details. So I thought, isn't that, and at the end of the day though, people need jobs, I guess. So, but I just thought, wow. And they said it's just becoming more and more and more prevalent. So
yeah, definitely.
For all of us to just be hyper vigilant.
100%. I think very, very important reminder from our session last week with Brad. And I know Brad's still got that offer going. So if you want to go back and look at our session for last week, click on the link and book that audit with Brad, because it's a really important time, particularly as we're coming into Christmas, particularly as people are going to be doing a lot more online shopping and a lot more ordering with postage and stuff. People know that, so they're going to take advantage of that and try and scam you, even if it's only that small amount of money. But imagine $1.60 from 100,000 people or 1 million people. That becomes a very, very big and lucrative scam. You may not be losing a very small amount, but overall it becomes a very large and lucrative business.
Indeed. And what are they doing next with those details? They've got those credit card details, they've got the address and all those things. So boom. Yeah, it's definitely very interesting. So I'm super pumped today. We're talking about Indigenous, and I'm struggling on the first word, Indigenous Business Month and social procurement. So how businesses are doing good. Now, Jenni, are you happy to share a little bit of your background so we can really understand why you also are going to be the expert and the one chatting about this?
So I'm an Indigenous business. I'm a Bundjalung woman from Northern Rivers, so an Aboriginal woman. So for me as a business owner, I'm automatically, put in that box of being an Indigenous business or a First Nations business. Whether I choose to identify or not, which I do, or not, it doesn't matter. That's who my heritage is, and that's my business. But also a lot of the work that I do, either as a small business coach, but also as a corporate consultant, is in relation to how do we actually build engagement and understanding around First Nations peoples, and particularly from a procurement perspective, and also looking at social procurement and why they're different, but why they're so important to look at as a holistic thing rather than just saying Indigenous over here, social procurement over here. What does it actually mean? And why is it actually important for us to start looking at it as business owners, no matter how big or small you are? It's a really critical aspect and a really important aspect to help boost the economy.
So for those listening in, let's go right from the very beginning, and let's start with, first of all, Indigenous or First Nations. What's the preference and what's the difference?
Well, really, it depends on the individual, to be perfectly honest. Some people, you know, if you're from central New South Wales, then you're always going to say Aboriginal because that's the traditional people in New South Wales are Aboriginal, not Torres Strait. Torres Strait is obviously a very specific part of our First Nations peoples. So for many people, the term Indigenous is a throwback to when we were referred to as flora and fauna, and the definition of Indigenous, you know, being flora and fauna of this country for many people who lived through that era where it was actually considered derogatory, they don't like that term. So it really depends on the individual. For me, I believe that as a First Nations person, as an Aboriginal person, I am of this country. I am born and bred of this country. I am, you know, I have ancestors that date back, you know, 60,000 years on this country. So therefore I am Indigenous. So for me, it's a really powerful word to use, and I use it in that strength. First Nations is becoming more and more acceptable because it covers all peoples. So those First Nations on this land, rather than Indigenous. And some people say, well, I was born here, so therefore I'm Indigenous too. And to some extent, you could say that's true, but it's really not the intention of that word. So First Nations is often used as a preference these days, purely because it's very clear about it's the First Nations on that country, on that land. And in Australia, that's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Just love how very good you are at explaining things, because it's like the light bulbs go off for me every time you're talking on this topic, and I'm like, yes, it makes perfect sense. So thank you for that. So let's go to the next bit with what about being an Indigenous or a First Nations business? So you did say before that whether you choose to identify with that or not. So let's talk a little bit about that, and what does it mean, and who can decide that they are one or not?
Yeah, and it's really funny. I mean, many years ago, so 15, 20 years ago, being an Indigenous business, and to be honest, there's still there's some pockets in Australia who still think this. They believe that being an Indigenous business, you came with greater risk. So for a lot of people who are Indigenous, who own Indigenous businesses, they don't actively promote themselves as Indigenous. That's not because they're not proud of being a First Nations person. It's because they're worried that that unconscious bias, that Aboriginal people are not as effective as a business owner, not as successful, may not have the right governance, all the old myths and assumptions that used to kind of come with being Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander still exist in some spaces. So there are some businesses who say, look, I'm just a business. You know, I am an Aboriginal person, but I don't promote it. I don't need to have any accreditations on my website. I just do really good work, right? And so that's their choice and that's their preference. What it does though, it actually, for me, it's twofold. It's a personal preference, but I choose to identify and say that I'm a strong, successful Aboriginal business because I want to break down those myths. I want people to start recognizing that being an Aboriginal business or a First Nations business, what it says to people is we're a successful business and we have the value add for you of being First Nations. And what I mean by that is that we role model to other peoples the opportunities that exist for First Nations peoples now, which did not exist maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. We were excluded. The systematic policies of the country actually precluded us from being able to own businesses and operate in this way. And we had to get permission to own businesses back in the day. Whereas now we can say this is our choice, this is our right, and we're actually going to create long-term economic development for ourselves and our communities. Now, for some people, that can be challenging because they say, well, I'm a business on my own. I don't have a huge number of staff. So how am I giving back to the community? Well, for me, I give back because I choose to sponsor Yalari as a foundation in terms of education of a Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander student for the next 6 years of their high school. I provide pro bono or low bono coaching to new Indigenous businesses, but actually all small businesses I do that with. But also I'm role modeling to people and demonstrating that we are successful, we are proud, and that we're more than capable of delivering any service that you wish. So that's my choice. Does that make sense?
Totally, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And so Jenni, then what about the next piece, which is about social procurement? You want to explain what that's all about?
Yeah, so social procurement is a kind of more common, it's a more recent discussion. It's been around for years, right? So the idea of social procurement is that you choose to spend your money in a way that has a greater benefit than just the receipt of that particular product. So for example, Yarra Water. Yarra Water is actually a Bundjalung community owned business, and they produce water from the mountains, really beautiful spring water. So Yarra Water is an Aboriginal owned business, but it also has a Yarra Foundation. So even if they weren't Indigenous and they were just a water company and had an education foundation, by choosing to spend money with them, you're actually providing a social benefit beyond just having that water. So when we talk about social procurement, it's making a choice to spend your money in a way that has greater impact than just, you know, I need the pen, or I need the paper, or I need whatever it might be. And so when we talk social procurement, it covers all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some people include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses in them. Some people exclude it. It's up to them how you choose to define that. But really, it's about what is that, I guess, the tail and the back end piece that you get to get benefit from when actually engaging with that business. And a really great example are B Corp organizations. As a B Corp facilitator, most B Corp corporations have some social good. A really great example at the moment, which is really topical, is Patagonia, right? Patagonia, as a, you know, has a legacy now to say that how that money is going to be reinvested and how that company now belongs to essentially the earth, is, you know, and the profits will continue. There's social good in the choice of using Patagonia over any other, you know, type of business. So when we look at social procurement, the opportunity for the company is to say, I want to spend my money in a way that does good for the business, but also does good for the planet and the community in which that business operates.
So good. And interesting you bring up Patagonia as an example, because I use them in so many different ways as an example. In my most recent workshop on how to create your unique selling point, unique selling proposition. So writing your USP, I use Patagonia as an example because they just do it so incredibly well. Their message when you get to their website is all about what they do rather than what you can buy, which I just think is so incredibly good. But even 5 years ago, I was using them as an example. They had some really cool stuff about worn wear and how they would do whole stories from people that had been wearing their jacket to death. And it was just absolutely just beautiful. They just do a glorious job as a company. So
it is a beautiful company. And I think
example.
And that's when we talk about Indigenous Business Month. It was established about 5 or 6 years ago with Indigenous businesses here in Australia and in Melbourne. And they said, let's find a month where we celebrate and promote the successes of our businesses. And the crazy thing is people could still say to me, well, is there an Aboriginal business or Torres Strait Islander business that can do that? And the amazing thing is, if you can think about it, if you imagine that you need a service, there will be an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander business or a social procurement style, maybe social enterprise or a socially led business that probably delivers that service. And so if you want to actually start making a broader impact, that's how you can actually do that. And so whether it's through technology, there's drone technology, there's 4th generation augmented reality, environmental services. I mean, labor hire and recruitment is everywhere, but it's also down to energy providers and satellite services and, you know, solar farms. So the opportunity to actually engage with the community is incredibly significant. And in fact, going to New Orleans in a couple of weeks, it's for the NMSDC conference, so the National Minority Supplier Conference in the US.
Can you just say that one more time?
So it's the NMSDC. It is the, I'm going to make sure I always get the words incorrect. So the NMSDC is the National Minority Supplier Development Council in the US, and they look after all the minority businesses in the US. And so in a similar way Supply Nation does here in Australia, or some of the local Indigenous chambers of commerce who come together to provide, I guess, a peak body to promote and advocate for minority businesses. So the wonderful thing about when you look at this economy, when we recognize in Australia, we're between 3 to 5% of the population, depending on which census that you're looking at. But the opportunity as an economic development in terms of providing education, employment pathways, entrepreneurship pathways is quite incredible. And the value of the economy is growing at such a rapid rate here in Australia that we're becoming kind of a force to be reckoned with, whether it's, you know, the art I have behind me, the earrings that I wear, the clothes that I wear, or as I said, it may be purchasing solar power for my property or for my commercial property.
Or the cup that I use.
Or the cup that you use.
I bought that from a post office. There you go.
Yeah. And it's about making people not be surprised. So this is my view of the world, right? At the moment, we're always surprised when we see Indigenous art somewhere, or we see an Indigenous, like at the post office. We get it because it's been so withheld, if you like. It hasn't been available or accessible to people. Indigenous Business Month is really around saying we want to make it accessible for people to realize that we are just part of the society, right? We are part of the Australian landscape. So stop being surprised when you see a successful Aboriginal business. Stop worrying about whether the risk exists or not, because that's the same question you ask for every one of your suppliers. It shouldn't be just different whether you're a social procurement or a social enterprise, or whether you're an Indigenous business. But if we get rid of that kind of surprise about the opportunity and the success, it creates accessibility. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to work. That's what, for me as a business coach, and the work that I do with Supply Nation and other organizations, is about making Indigenous businesses accessible and make people realize that we are just really great businesses. And the value that we bring to you is we demonstrate and role model success for our communities and other communities as well.
Brilliant. And Jenni, as you know, I am born and bred in New Zealand. So I have a very different experience of growing up in terms of integration. So you can get artwork, you can get anything you want created by just absolutely glorious stuff. I came home with a number of pairs of earrings and a beautiful little flex bag and all kinds of things. So it's also very much intertwined. Come to Australia and you go to a tourist shop, for example, and what can you get? Like, I'm here just near Byron Bay, which is full of tourist stuff, and it's the surf life-saving stuff on t-shirts, or koala or kangaroo, and very little Indigenous anything. So I found that super, super interesting. The other thing I found is that it's only recently they've started embracing even the local fauna, for example, like beautiful wattles or whatever, whereas at home it's very much about the Patagonia and just all the beautiful things. So I think it's just been incredibly slow going on here, and it is beautiful to start seeing it come out. And you did right. I saw that in the post office and it excited me and shocked me. It didn't shock me that it was a glorious Indigenous artist getting, selling great stuff. What it was is that it was in the post office.
Yeah.
Actually in Ballynudgel, this tiny, tiny, tiny little post office. So, but I thought beautiful. And I have a lot of Indigenous art in my room, in my office here, that's all got a pink tinge to it. So yes, my pink cup was perfect for that. But I just think that's super fascinating. I'd like to know your take on it, of why all of a sudden it seems to be happening.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. I think you have to recognize that most of the policies that excluded or had really negative impact on our community only finished in the late 70s, early 80s. So we're talking stolen generation. The policy ceased in the 70s, but they didn't have internet. They didn't have they didn't have mobile phones. So it wasn't like they sent an email blast out to everyone and said, "Hey, stop the policy." There's a period of time where that policy had to cease, and there's still a lot of there's still a lot of racism essentially towards Aboriginal peoples in Australia and Torres Strait Islander peoples in Australia. That is unfortunately the case. But what we found over the last 10 to 15 years is that we've got people who are starting to have had opportunities to go, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to start to be successful, and I'm going to start role modeling what amazing businesses and humans that we are, and demonstrate success. And when you start to get people who are showing up to say, I can do this, you can do this too. And it's that view of, you can't be what you can't see. And so for many, many years, we couldn't see we could be that, right? We couldn't see that. And for many communities, particularly remote communities, it's taken a lot longer for them to actually feel empowered and to embrace their own kind of identity and power to stand up and say, I'm going to do this. At the same token, the non-Indigenous Australia, it's taken them a long while to start accepting that we can be a business. And that's a throwback to a lot of negative policy, beliefs that no longer serve anyone to have around the capability and capacity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. There's still that capacity conversation that is had consistently. And until that disappears completely, we're going to still be in this moment of surprise, we're here and we're really great at business.
You said something so beautiful. I just had to quickly type it into my notes. because it was just that glorious. And it is, you can't be what you can't see. So we're often saying, you don't know what you don't know, you know, because really that's true, but you can't be what you can't see is just extraordinary. I love it so much. I'm loving that you're being so others can see what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because it's so incredible. You've got this amazing
Really kind.
brain, but you've also got such a beautiful and generous heart. You just blow my mind always, Jenni. I'm so lucky to know you.
That's very kind. And it was funny. I was last week, I was working with, I did a facilitation for a group of people, and we were talking about, when we talk about First Nations peoples, we have to also remember that we were the first engineers. We were the first scientists. We were the first teachers. We were the first medical people. We call them doctors in Australian, in, you know, Western language, but we were the first people who healed people.
Yes.
And so we have a 60,000 year as the longest and oldest civilization on the planet. We have a lot of expertise, and often that's discounted. In the conversation we were having around engineering, we talk about engineering now and we think of, you know, mechanical engineering or building bridges or all the kind of things that you see people do. But imagine the understanding and knowledge to create a spear. And this is what we were discussing, to know the right type of wood to create the spear, to make sure that the angles were correct. So when it flew, it had the right aerodynamics. Or if you're making fire sticks, to know which particular tree based on their chemical compounds to be able to create fire stick. That's a conversation we don't have in the mainstream. And that's when we think about where we've come from. No, so we didn't create the wheel. Who gives a crap? We could throw spears, and we created stuff that were foundational to our longevity and our, and so when we start to think about that, we used to navigate ourselves through the stars, as did so many others. But there's a science and an understanding around the seasons that we have, and that's not often recognized. So while this month is about Indigenous Business Month, I think it's also an opportunity for us to say, let's have a think about the incredible knowledge and the wealth of knowledge that exists. And we're losing it because it's not valued. But to start saying, how do we tap back into those conversations about science and medicine and engineering and all those things that will actually inform and enable us, the non-Indigenous community, to actually continue as long as we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we, firstly, I guess the question is, how do we find Indigenous businesses to support? That's a good one. You mentioned Supply Nation before.
Yep.
So I also believe possibly there might be a directory in the pipeline for how to find Indigenous businesses.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways. So Supply Nation is the Australia's peak body, and that what they do is they certify businesses. So the reason we certify, and there are some people who don't really connect with this, and that's okay. But the advantage of the Supply Nation is it provides opportunities, particularly for large corporates who want to commit through reconciliation action plans or similar, and say, we really want to identify Indigenous businesses, but we want to make sure we have a legitimate business. We don't have someone who is pretending to be an Indigenous business so they can get the social benefit or the procurement benefit from that. So Supply Nation certifies and registers businesses. So if I'm an Indigenous business, I can go into Supply Nation for free, and I can register my information. And if I'm 51% or more owned, I can become certified. In which case, what that does is it says to corporations, I'm a going concern, I have all my insurances, and that I'm a safe place, right? And it's about trying to change some of that unconscious bias. And it's an easy way for people to engage. But almost every state also has local Indigenous chambers of commerce. So here in Queensland, it's the Southeast Queensland Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, so SEQICC. In Melbourne, it's Kinaway, and New South Wales has the New South Wales Indigenous Chamber of Commerce as well. So there's lots of different ways. And literally, if you Google Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, you will find one wherever you're located. There's Black Business Finder, which is the government's version. So there's a lot of opportunity to find Indigenous businesses. For this business month, the DATSIP in Queensland have actually getting support with a company called Iscariot Media through Lisa Watergo, who has been in business for 20 plus years and one of the original kind of Indigenous businesses here in Australia, in Victoria, where I live, Queensland. And they're running a exhibition next Friday, a breakfast and a discussion and a forum around Indigenous businesses here in Queensland. So the reality is, just like social procurement, Indigenous businesses, if you want to engage, go to literally Google Indigenous businesses and plus what you're looking for. So you can go to Supply Nation. Their directory is open for anybody to see. You can search publicly on that. Reach out to me and ask if you're not quite sure. I'm more than happy to have a chat to you about kind of the type where you can find your businesses in your local area.
Maybe a page for your website.
Yes.
Some links to all of those. How to support businesses.
That is a great idea. So we might actually do that this week. We might actually create a page, but we're also looking at, we also know there are other companies who will actually create directories that where businesses basically, it becomes like a wholesale essentially, and they will put their goods and services through a particular website, and then that website takes a percentage off, as you know, it's like a consignment service. As an Indigenous business, particularly for some of the new businesses, that's quite challenging because that margin is not necessarily a really high margin, and that takes a fair chunk off their money. We're looking at, with a colleague of mine, developing an Indigenous business directory, which will enable anybody to connect with any type of business. And Indigenous businesses just need to basically register, put their details up, and there's no clip, if you like. There's no cost for them, and it's basically just designed to be an opportunity to connect businesses for free, to try and remove those barriers that people believe exist in relation to connecting.
Beautiful. So Jenni, you can, if you're, I can't remember the percentage, but of Australian made, etc. So to get that little beautiful green and yellow triangle saying Australian made or Australian made and owned, and then put that on your website, put it on your swing tags, put it everywhere.
Yep.
Do with what you're doing. And I have a couple of clients who see the value in that and pay the money for that.
Yep.
So I'm really intrigued. Is there something, if you're an Indigenous business, that you can put that on your website or wherever so that we can see that really clearly, like we can see the Australian made?
Definitely. And in fact, for Indigenous businesses, it's free. You don't actually have to pay to do that. So Supply Nation gives you Supply Nation certification or registration. So registration means it's an orange logo, and it says registered versus the certified, which is a red logo in the standard. They obviously have their alternate colors versions. But the registered businesses are 50% or less owned, or a not-for-profit or a franchise business. So the idea of 50% owned is I might be in a husband and wife partnership, for example, right? Or I might, as I said, a franchise. At 51% owned, when you have the certified stamp, the idea is to recognize that certified businesses are then both owned and controlled by Aboriginal people. So the difference between being certified and registered is simply saying that the money stays within that Aboriginal community or within that Aboriginal business. It's not being siphoned off potentially to a non-Indigenous business. It is generally designed that so for me, I'm 100% owned and managed Aboriginal business. Kinaway in Victoria does this a very similar certification for members if they want to get certified through that. Social Traders is also another one in terms of social enterprises. So Social Traders, and there's a number of other companies here in Queensland who do it as well. They will certify you as a social enterprise business, which is just talking about saying that your profits get reinvested in the business and that you're doing a social good. So there's a number of different organizations, but from Indigenous businesses, your Chamber of Commerce's, Indigenous Chamber of Commerce's, definitely provide that certificate, that stamp, and you'll get a state-based stamp. But nationally, Supply Nation provides that as a national service, if you like.
So fascinating. I just love it. And I wonder then, how about we talk next week then about businesses and social good?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of businesses out there are doing amazing stuff and actually aren't sharing that. So in a way, it almost brings in your USP, doesn't it? And
100%.
Coming up with the way that you'll be able to share what's different about your business and what's special about what you do in relation to for the greater good.
Social good. And that's where B Corp certification is a really great measure of that, because B Corp certification is measuring how you're doing good across community, your governance, your workforce, your community. So it's actually looking at how do you actually, environment, of course. So what are you doing to support as a general social good? So are you that corporate social responsibility or ESG, whichever kind of acronym you're using, it allows you to identify what is my social or environmental commitment. And so I think 100% we're starting to move more and more to that as we're talking about renewable energy. We're talking about sustainability as a society. We need to start looking at what the downstream impact of our businesses are.
And then who you align yourself with. So I think that a lot of people want to make better buying decisions, whether that's buying a product or buying a service. because look at the state of the world right now. We need to be supporting local. We need to be supporting Indigenous. We need to be supporting Australian businesses. So we need to be supporting things made here as well. So a lot of us want to do it, but the question is how.
Yeah, so, so I'd love to. Next week, there's so many amazing places like, you know, and I know we'll talk about next week, but 1% for the Planet is a really great, it's a global organization that actually, so companies who go, I don't really know what I'm doing. But I want to play in this space. You can actually pledge to be part of 1% for the Planet, where you're providing 1% of your revenue annually and it goes to an environmental based charity. So if your pension is about environment versus social, then you've got organizations who specifically focus on doing good with money in that space. So that's where we can say, okay, well, what is your focus? Is it social engagement? Is it environmental? Is it about supporting underserved organizations? All those aspects can come into that social good, which is why we have social procurement strategies nationally from state governments. Victorian government is probably the most advanced in that regard in terms of their Victorian social procurement policy. It's quite an advanced and very clear guidelines for anybody doing business with Victorian government. Western Australia has a similar process, and I believe Queensland's going to do that, because in Queensland, sort of fun fact, with the Olympics in 2032, they've pledged that it will be carbon positive. So it's actually, they have to ensure, and that includes all the flights of every athlete coming to Queensland. So the impact and the requirement to start looking at social responsibility is becoming mainstream, because you imagine Olympics being carbon positive. That's going to require a lot of work.
They're going to be coming across in a dinghy rowing their boat.
I know, right? How are they going to do that? So that's the question. So if you're a company doing social good or environmental good, carbon offsets, all those things, and you're in Queensland, this is your time, because that's something that we're going to be focusing on more and more in the next decade leading up to the Olympics.
And also you might be doing it and you don't even realize. For example, Hello Media is a sponsor of many, many businesses through the Kiva Scheme. So, and I choose specifically women-owned businesses and ones that are really trying to help other women in business, etc., through different countries. So I've been involved with Kiva for many, many years. When I had Rainbows and Clover, I was part of the B1G1 group, which is extraordinary. So I think without even knowing it, you could actually be doing that. Or if you don't know how to do it and you want to, let's talk about that next week.
That sounds like an amazing topic. I'd love to continue that.
Very good. Well, I look forward to chatting with you then, Jenni. And it might be almost our last one before you head off.
Yeah, I know. And then I'm away for 2 weeks, and then we're back to kind of recap on what's happened from the conferences that we go and see when we're in.
I can't wait. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. I think every time we talk about this, it's just, I think it's a massive minefield out there and a lot of people like me are just confused. So every time when you just give me a little bit more clarity, I'm like, yep, great. And so, having that information is so important. So
it is. And remember though, and I guess the key piece is, this is just my view. These are my personal perceptions. If you have somebody else have a conversation with you about this and they might have a different opinion, that is okay. It's the choice is, this is how I choose to show up and talk about it. This is how I choose to show up and promote Indigenous businesses and social enterprises and that social procurement idea. And so if you are confused and you might get multiple ideas, that's okay. It's then your job to say, okay, well, how do I want to show up as an individual? What does this mean to me? And then how am I going to go forward? This is just information. You can choose to do what you want with it. And if you take it forward, that would be amazing.
Beautiful. I love it. Thanks so much, Jenni. Look forward to chatting with you next week. So how can people get in touch with you and see the new possible coming soon page on your website of how to support Indigenous businesses?
You can catch hold of us at Elephant in the Room AU. That's on our socials. If you type Elephant in the Room in Google, AU in Google, you'll find us across our socials. Our website, eitrconsulting.com. And how about you?
Hellomedia.team is where to find us. And we just also recently launched positivepassionatebusinesswoman.com, which is our new directory for our online networking group. So that's a whole nother topic for a chat that I might do while you're away, actually. But also Jenni is our speaker next week, so which is really exciting. So it's just an amazing way to be able to choose to work with women-led businesses.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm
and
really,
remember,
really
for
excited
women-led
about that.
businesses, if you're a single parent, if you're somebody who's been disadvantaged, then you are a social, you can be considered social procurement. So have a think about how you can leverage your own situation, your own environment to say, if we're a social business doing good, start promoting that. As you've said, Carly, start promoting it and leveraging off that, because people want to work with people who do good.
Yes, that's beautifully said. So next week we'll chat about that, and also how you can write your USP and weave in that message. So really how to showcase
Love that.
different about what you do and what makes you special.
Amazing. Well, have a great week. I look forward to chatting to you next week.
Me too. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a great week and a great weekend. Bye-bye.